Today's video has to do with the ethnogenesis of the Macedonians, so we could say that it's another episode of the dedicated series. We have talked about ancient Greek ethnogenesis, we have talked about the ancient Romans, today it's Macedonia. The ethnopoiesis of the Macedonian people has been the fulcre of quite a lot of scholarly debate over the years. Moreover, in recent decades, modern national politics got involved. Today, we will not be doing any politics here, and we will look at the evidence to simply and correctly answer this question based on the interpretation of the ancient sources and contextualized data analysis. Thus, this study will adopt a multidisciplinary approach, weaving together historical text, epigraphic data, material culture, and historiographical analysis to assess the legitimacy of the Macedonians' inclusion within the Hellenistic world. The goal is not merely to classify them, but to understand the processes by which identity was asserted, contested, and mythologized from antiquity to the present. Furthermore, in order to answer this question thoroughly, we'll have to address three specific elements: their language, their culture, and territorial ties. Some argue that among the first records regarding ancient Macedonian history, the epic poem Iliad written by Homer should be mentioned. There is a people named Paionians from White Axios and a couple of interesting toponyms, one of which is Emathia. This name will be overridden by the name Macedon, so a tie could be possible. As a general frame of reference for the next section, we're going to move into the examination of the ancient sources, as who better than the ancients to tell us what the Macedonians actually were. Already in the different variants of the myth of Macedon, both Hesiod and Hellanicus implicitly indicate that the Macedonians are of Greek stock, closely related in fact to the Aeolians. Even Herodotus does not seem to have doubts regarding the Greekness of the Macedonians, who, according to him, however, are not of Aeolic stock. Herodotus tells us that the Macedonians was the name that had been acquired by those Dorians who in very remote times had settled at the foot of the Pindus mountain chain near the Orestis. We'll come back to that toponym later. Alright, let's confirm this by jumping into the actual sources. From Herodotus book 156 we read, "But the Dorians on the contrary have been constantly on the move. Their home in Deucalion's reign was Pythiotis, and in the reign of Dorus, son of Hellen, the country known as Histiaeotis, in the neighborhood of Ossa and Olympus. Driven from there by the Cadmeians, they settled in Pindus, and were known as Macedons. Thence they migrated to Dryopis and finally to Peloponnese, where they got their present name of Dorians." Justin also gives us some interesting information, check this out. Caranus, the first Macedon king, came to Emathia with a large band of Greeks, being instructed by an oracle to seek a home in Macedonia. Returning to Herodotus' histories, we find this. The Macedonians made away with all that, as well as with all the envoys themselves. No long time afterwards, the Persians made a great search for these men, but Alexander had cunning enough to put an end to it by the gift of a great sum and his own sister, Gigaia, to Berberis, a Persian, and the general of those who were looking for the slain men. It was in this way, then, that the death of these Persians was kept silent. Now that these descendants of Perdica are Greeks, as they themselves say, I must have chance to know. Now we will come back to more sources that help us identify the Macedonians as a people and also their movements throughout the land. But now I would like to open a brief parenthesis on the mythology of it. According to Hesiod, the ancestor of the Macedonians, Macedon, was the son of the god Zeus and Thea. According instead to Hellanicus, he was the son of Aeolus, the ancestor of the Aeolians, who, together with the Achaeans, Dorians, and Ionians, formed the four Greek tribes. According instead to Theopompus, a Greek historian and rhetorician, the first king of the Macedonians would have been Caranus, son of Temenus, the Doric king of the city of Argos, who would have left his paternal city when, after the monarch's death, a succession war would have broken out among his sons. Marcisas of Pella, another Greek historian, appears to share the same parameters when it comes to the history and mythology of it. According to the myth, Caranus would have relied on a prophecy of the oracle of Delphi, according to which he would find his new kingdom in a place particularly rich in fauna, and therefore in his wanderings he would have followed the tracks left by a herd of goats. There are different varieties of this myth. Either Caranus would have founded his city in Aegae, which is in Macedonia. 2, he could have conquered it by taking it from natives, or once again he may have received it as a gift from the king of the Orestis region in exchange for military support. And if we were to believe the second one, then the original name of the town would have been Edessa. Polybius, whom we often read on this channel, is the next author who appears to have no doubts whatsoever upon the Greekness of the Macedonians. Theotis was the country in which the Hellenes dwelt, but under Dorus, the son of Hellen, they moved to the tract at the base of Ossa and Olympus, which is called Histiaiotis. Forced to retire from the region by the Cadmeians, they settled under the name of Makedni, in the chain of Pindus. Hence, they once removed and came to Dryopis, and from Dryopis, having entered the Peloponnese in this way, they became known as Dorians. Now that we have spent some time to see how the Greeks saw the Macedonians, let's have a look at how the Persians describe them. From an external eye, that of the Persians indeed, the Macedonians are Greeks. Once again, Greek. On the inscriptions of Darius I's mausoleum, the population subdued by the great king are enumerated, among which, as far as the West is concerned, we have Scythians, Thracians, and Greeks, or rather, how they call it, Iauna, transliterated as Ionians. In Darius's inscriptions, however, just as the Scythians are distinguished into three groups, pointed hat Scythians, Scythians who drink hauma, that is, soma, the sacred drink, and Scythians beyond the sea, the Iauna, which, as we described, where the Ionians are distinguished into Iauna, the Iauna Takabara, and the Iauna with a hat like a shield. Scholars have interpreted this as a reference to the kausia, the characteristic rounded headgear of the Macedonians. The Persians are indeed an external observer, perhaps incapable of grasping substantial differences between foreign people, yet they not only prove capable of distinguishing between the different ethnicities of the Scythians, but also of identifying the Ghetto-Thracians as a separate ethnos. Therefore, there is almost no doubt that these are specifically Macedonians and that they are considered a subcategory of Greeks and Ionians. Let's now move into the material good with a little bit of archaeology. Let's talk about the accursed tablets at Pella. In 1986 at Pella, a lead scroll with magical inscriptions was found, the so-called katadesmos, essentially a sort of evil eye and love spell. The Pella tablet is the richest example we have of ancient Macedonian, meaning the language, and years of analysis and research have allowed, with a certain margin of safety, to identify the matrix of the language. In light of the most recent studies, several academics, including the historian Miltiades Atsopoulos and the linguist Claude Brixey, in particular, tend to identify Macedonian as a peculiar Greek dialect, with characteristic elements of Northwestern Doric and some reminiscences of Aeolic languages. This language was a bit of an amalgam, which was probably created, at least according to these linguists and historians, in the Orestis, during the ethnogenesis of the Macedonians. The fact that at the base of Macedonian as a language there were two branches of Greek, namely Doric and Aeolic, which were considered barbaric to the ears of those who spoke Attic dialects, is probably not a coincidence, but we will explore this further later. Yet Macedonian as a language was quite unique throughout Hellas. For example, linguists identify the presence within Macedonian of terms which are traceable to Illyrian and Thracian languages, both due to proximity to these peoples and, particularly in the case of Thracian languages, from the fact that already with Alexander I, the Kingdom of Macedonia had incorporated territories inhabited by Thracian tribes like the Mygdones, the Edonians, and the Bryges. And it's not by chance that in the east of Axios, even in the Macedonian era, the presence of Thracian-type onomastics persists. This geographical proximity to Thracians, Paeonians, and Illyrians, together with the peripherality with respect to the Greece of the polis, must have further increased a certain sense of otherness, at least from the perspective of the Athenians, which we will review later on the video.